not an insult, although insult humor is also a staple of comedy. And in fact, an example of insulting someone's looks was on display that night when Regina Hall said, "We've been dealing with COVID for 2 years. It's been really hard on people." And Amy Schumer said, "Yeah, just look at Timothée Chalamet," and they cut to J.K. Simmons. Who made a face a lot like the one Jada would make later on. But that's where it ended. It's called being a good sport, especially when you're a rich celebrity. Let the common people take the piss out of you for one stinking minute. And importantly, Chris's joke was received as funny. As evidenced by the audience and Will Smith laughing. And this is the moment where we got to see a live-action, real-time encapsulation of how cancel culture works. Look at what happens next. Jada shoots her husband a look. Let's slow the tape down to capture this moment. There. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Back and to the left. Before this moment, Will is laughing because he hasn't yet found out that his original, genuine reaction is wrong and that he should conform to a different view. And he's the one who's being manly?
Good morning. It is Wednesday, Wasdin Wednesday, July the 26th, and this is The True Conservative. Welcome to all the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. I'm Ron, your host, and the only true conservative in the United States today. So today, after the Serenity Prayer and the Patriotic Song of the Day, we will have my take, no free lunch, the rape of the mind, Sébastien Gorka, Vivek Ramaswamy, CNN, and SEAL Team 6. All that and more when I get back. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. Thank you. And now there's no free lunch. 250 Economic Truths by David-Bahnsen.
me offer you my definition of social justice. I keep what I earn and you keep what you earn. Do you disagree? Well, then tell me how much of what I earn belongs to you and why. Walter Williams. The real principle being advocated for here by the great Walter Williams is that of private property and the inherent justice in protecting private property. Systems of confiscation undermine justice. For Williams, social justice starts with the premise of protecting the fruits of one's labor, and then it works from there into discussions of how to fund government, charity, etc. The modern social justice movement does it in reverse. They start with the premise that the fruits of one's labor first belong to the social needs of society, then work into what may be left for the earner or laborer. Social justice is a topic in need of extensive treatment, as it is a loaded term, one with great emotional impact, but one that is never used without strong presuppositions. Unpacking those presuppositions, the ideological commitments one brings to the use of the term, must be our priority.
And that was There's No Free Lunch by David-Bahnsen. Back in a minute. Thank you. So who is the true conservative? He is the person that has the courage of his convictions and is confident in what he knows. He is the person that understands that culture trumps politics. He's not selfish, but minds his own business. He does not go looking for trouble. He is alert. He curbs his curiosity, and he acts like an adult. He is patriotic and uses common sense. He is judgmental and moralizes. He refuses to speculate, speaks clearly and definitively, and is not afraid to say no. He's open-minded, asking why, rather than why not. He is consistent, credible, and influential, not ashamed of his existence, unafraid to learn or correct his mistakes. He is a normal American, and he is better than the socialist. He's a better friend, father, brother, family member, and a better person, period. You have to know that being a true conservative is best, or you are wasting your time. Back in a minute. Thank you. Another Ayn Rand quote. Quote, I have observed that many people evade, rationalize, and drive their minds into a state of blind stupor in dread of discovering that those they choose to deal with, their loved ones, for instance, are not merely mistaken, but evil. I have observed that this dread leads them to sanction, to help, and to spread the very evil whose existence they fear to acknowledge. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now from Sébastien Gorka's Twitter account.
I want to go to another topic very quickly before we run out of time, Congressman Gates. Last night, Speaker McCarthy suggested publicly for the first time that the evidence is rising to the level for potential impeachment inquiry into the president. What would it take for us to get to that point?
I think we're there already, but I don't put much stock in Speaker McCarthy's words on that point because Speaker McCarthy, before his ascendance to the speakership, said we were going to open an impeachment inquiry into Mayorkas, and we haven't done that. And then weeks ago, he said that the IRS whistleblower information justified an impeachment inquiry into Merrick Garland, and then we didn't do that. And now he is largely analyzing evidence that we've had for some time about these bank payments from the Chinese through pass-throughs to the Biden family. And he's saying, well, maybe we should impeach Joe Biden. It just kind of sounds like a lot of talk to me. I'm going to continue dogged oversight work, but you hit the nail on the head in the monologue. Follow the money. Okay, talk is cheap. I want to know if we're going to continue to send money to these agencies of government that push critical race theory, that try to divide people from their parents, that try to turn young folks against a nation that is the greatest in all of human history. And if we do that, and if we stay focused on the money, then I think we can actually get wins for our people. If we give airy talk every few months when it's politically convenient to gaslight impeachment inquiries, I don't know that that's been a successful endeavor for us.
Well, you're right. Congress has the purse strings, so we're going to see real soon what happens. Congressman Matt Gaetz, thanks so much for joining us.
And that was from the account of Dr. Sébastien Gorka. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now, Stuart Varney's My Take.
Drama seems to be Hunter Biden's middle name. Last night, before his court appearance this morning, top Republican Jason Smith sent a 400-page brief to the judge saying Hunter had benefited from political interference. He wants that included in today's hearing. That would upend the proceedings if it actually got in. Then, late last night, one of Hunter's attorneys was accused of misleading the clerk's office, trying to get damaging information out of the hearings. The lawyers say it was the result of unfortunate and unintended communication. Okay, let's see what the judge says about that. Which brings us to right now, as Hunter appears in the Delaware court to plead guilty to minor tax and gun charges. He's not going to prison. Let's get into that. For 6 years, Hunter failed to report and did not pay tax on about $17 million that came to him from questionable sources. He's very fortunate to be the son of Joe Biden. As the Wall Street Journal says, you'd go to prison for what Hunter Biden did. When he did eventually file tax returns, he tried to write off his drug dealer's hotel room, his liaisons with call girls, and even his sex club dues. Now, some of our viewers may remember Leona Helmsley, who went to prison for deducting her personal expenses. Helmsley was very unpopular. She served time. Hunter's dad is the president. He won't serve time. The charge here is that Hunter got special treatment. And more importantly, the government made sure he got special treatment by interfering in any and all investigations. That is a perversion of justice and a stain on this presidency. Secondara Varney just warming up.
Thank you. And now, the rape of the mind.
Blackmailing through overburdening guilt feelings. Deep within all of us lie hidden feelings of guilt, unconscious guilt, which can be brought to the surface under such extreme stress. The strategy of arousing guilt is the mother's oldest tool for gaining dominance over children's souls. Her warning and accusing finger or her threatening eyes give her magic power over them and help create deep-seated guilt feelings which may continue all through their adult lives. When we are children, we depend on our parents and resent them for just this reason. We may harbor hidden destructive wishes against those closest to us and feelings of guilt about these wishes. There's no question that most men have profound loyalty to their families, but the primitive in him hates those he loves, and this hatred makes him feel guilty. Buried deep in his unconscious is the knowledge that, in his hostile fantasies, he has felt himself capable of committing many crimes. Theodore Reich has drawn our attention to the unknown primitive murderer in all of us, whose compulsion to confess and to be punished may be easily provoked under circumstances of terror and depression. This concept of concealed infantile hostility and destructiveness is often difficult for the layman to accept, but consider for a moment the popularity of the detective story. We may tell ourselves that we enjoy reading these tales because we identify with the keen and clever sleuth. But, as it is clear from psychoanalytic experience, the repressed criminal in all of us is also at work, and we also identify with the conscienceless killer. As a matter of fact, our repressed hostilities make the reading of hostile acts attractive to us. The method of systematically exploiting unconscious guilt to create submission is not too well known, but it may be better understood in the light of our investigation of the unconscious confession compulsion and the need for punishment. Guilt may be instilled early in life when the parent urges the child too much and too early to apologize for his disobedience, or uses other means to burden the child with a sense of guilt when he does not understand what was unmoral or wrong about a given act. Teaching the child to see right and wrong does not necessarily imply being conditioned with submissive and anxious anticipation of punishment to follow. In one of my cases, the patient's mother cried after every little mistake the child made. "Look what you've done to me." It took protracted therapy to relieve this patient of his hidden murderous impulses against his mother and his consequent burden of guilt. In the political sphere, Many such early child-rearing methods are symbolically repeated. Continual purges and confessions, as we encounter them in totalitarian countries, arouse deeply hidden guilt feelings. The lesser sin of rebellion or subversion has to be admitted to cover personal thoughts of crime which are more deeply embedded. The personal reactions of those who are continually interrogated and investigated give us a clue as to what happens. The very fact of prolonged interrogation can re-arouse the hidden and unconscious guilt in the victim. At a time of extreme emotion, after constant accusation and day-long interrogation, when he has been deprived of sleep and reduced to the state of utter despair, the victim may lose the capacity to distinguish between the real criminal act of which he is accused and his own fantasized unconscious guilt. If his upbringing burdened him with an almost pathological sense of guilt under normal circumstances, he will now be completely unable to resist the menticidal attack. Even normal people may be brought to surrender under such miserable conditions, and not only through the action of the Inquisition, but also because of all other weakening factors. Lack of sleep, hunger, and illness can create utter confusion and make any man vulnerable to hypnotic influence. All of us have experienced the mental fuzziness which comes with being overtired. Concentration camp victims know how hunger, especially, induces loss of mental control. In the fantastic world of the totalitarian prison or camp, these effects are heightened and exaggerated. The conversation in concentration camps usually revolved around food and memories of glorious gluttony. The mind could not work. It was fixed on eating and fantasies about food. A word grew up to express the constant possession by the idea of eating well once again: stomach masturbation, meganonanti. This kind of talk often took the place of all intellectual exchange. The Nazis, through clever exploitation of their victims' unconscious guilt, after poking into back corners of their minds, were often able to convert courageous resistance fighters into meek collaborators. That they were not uniformly successful can be explained by two factors. The first is that most of the members of the underground were inwardly prepared for the brutality with which they were treated. The second is that, clever as the Nazi techniques were, they were not as irresistible as the methodical tricks of the communist brainwashers are. When victims of Nazi brutality did break down, it was not torture, but often the threat of reprisal against family which made them give in. Sudden acute confrontation with a long-buried childhood problem creates confusion and doubt. All of a sudden, the enemy puts before you a clash of loyalties: your father or your friends, your brother or your fatherland, your wife or your honor. This is a brutal choice to have to make, and when the Inquisitor makes use of your additional inner conflicts, he can easily force you into surrender. A clash between loyalties makes either choice a betrayal, and this arouses paralyzing doubt. This calculated but subtle attack on the weakest spots in man's mind, on a man's conscience, and on the moral system he has learned from the Judeo-Christian ethics, paralyzes the reason and leads the victim more easily into betrayal. The Inquisitor subtly tests his victim's archaic guilt feelings toward paternal figures, his friends, his children. He cleverly exploits the victim's early ambivalent ties with his parents. This sudden outbreak of hidden moral flaws and guilt can bring a man to tears and complete breakdown. He regresses to dependency and submissiveness of the baby. The very husky former hero of the Dutch resistance, known as King Kong because of his size and strength, became the treacherous instrument of the Nazis soon after his brother had been taken with him and the Nazis threatened to kill the youth. King Kong's final surrender to the enemy and his becoming their treacherous tool was psychiatrically recognizable as a defense mechanism against his deep guilt, arising from hidden feelings of aggression against his brother, Boris. Another example of breakdown is seen in the story of one young resistance fighter who, after the Nazis had threatened to torture his father, who was imprisoned with him, finally broke into childish tears and promised to tell them everything they wanted to know. After that, he was taken back to his cell in order to be softened up again the following day. This was the routine of his interrogator. The Inquisitors understood only too well the effectiveness of patient pursuit at repeated moments while intruding into a man's guilt feelings. Although both prisoners were liberated that night as the consequence of the Allied sweep through Belgium and the southwest part of Holland, the boy remained in his depression for a long time, tortured by his knowledge that he had nearly betrayed his best friends in the underground in order to save his father, in spite of knowing at the same time that the promises of the enemy would not have protected his father.
And that was blackmailing through overburdening in the rape of the mind by overburdening guilt feelings by from the rape of the mind by Joost-Meerlo, MD. Back in a minute. Thank you. Now, Vivek Ramaswamy.
Department of Education. I think the federal government is not, as a factual matter, directly involved in education. I think it is therefore a deadweight waste for money to cycle from the taxpayers to the Federal Department of Education to then disperse those funds inefficiently as they do, tilting the scales to four-year college degrees over choices that people might have otherwise made that are better choices for them, vocational training, 1-year, 2-year programs, using it as a cudgel, and this relates to the latter issue you asked about, to tell local schools they don't get that money unless they're adopting what I certainly view as toxic racial and gender ideology-based agendas. They use the money as a cudgel to do it. So I've said that department that spends about $80 billion of taxpayer money, I'll shut it down. Tonight in New Hampshire, I'm laying out the anatomy of exactly how we'll shut it down. And then return that money to the states, to the people, put it in parents' pockets. Very specifically, you have to be a state that has a school choice program in order to receive that Department of Education shutdown dividend. I think that if you're such a state, I would also believe that those states need to write their teachers' contracts in a way that stop teachers from joining teachers' unions, which I think have been a destructive force on our public schools. If you're unionizing against the public, think about who you're unionizing against, the very kids you're supposed to represent. Now we have transparency, we have choice. If you teach it in the classroom, put it online. And then there's an interesting fact in this country where I think you guys will appreciate how bizarre this fact really is. There's not only like a failed positive correlation, there is a negative correlation, an inverse correlation between how much money per student a public school spends and the actual outcomes that that school achieves for its students. So in my version of school choice, my preferred version, it would not just be that parents get to get these vouchers and educational savings accounts to send their kids to some other school. That's part of the story. It's a first step. But I think any parent who moves to a school that spends less per student, which we know based on the data is actually all else equal a better performing school as it relates to achievement, should be able to take half the delta with them. So let's take Chicago or Pennsylvania spending $35,000, $40,000 per student. 15 miles away, you have a school spending $15,000 to $20,000 per student. I think they should be able to take half the difference, that $10,000 to $15,000, half that difference of the $20,000, say $10,000 they take with them. You run the math on normal investment returns. You're talking about $250,000 plus graduation gift when that kid graduates from 12th grade. So you tell me which is a better use of money. It's not even close. And I think the head of the snake is, yes, a federal bureaucracy.
It's a great idea.
Thank you. And a little bit more Vivek Ramaswamy. He's on the PBS NewsHour.
Let me ask you about that. I know that you are someone who opposes affirmative action. You and I have talked about this, and you told me that you don't see a difference in opportunity for people based on color in this country. But we do know that data say that Black mothers and babies are more likely to die at a rate of 2 to 3 times those of whites. We also know when it comes to income, for example, that Blacks and Hispanics often earn, on average, a third less than whites. Where do you think those disparities come from, and how would you as president address them?
They come from disparities in the fatherlessness epidemic across this country. 25% of kids, sadly, of all skin colors are born into fatherless homes in the United States of America today. Those kids are 8 times more likely to end up in jail, in poverty. Those kids are more likely to suffer from mental health disorders later in life, to underperform in schools, regardless of what race they are. Now, let's actually take a look at the racial disparities. It's upwards of 50%, 40+% of Black kids born into single-parent households. For Asian American kids, it's single digits. That's what explains the difference in achievement, not systemic racism. That's the problem we need to fix.
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy on PBS NewsHour. Back in a minute. And I wanted to say that Vivek lost that argument. And he lost that argument because he didn't pay attention to the vocabulary. She started out setting him up by saying, I know that you oppose affirmative action. What he should have said was, no, I oppose racism. And if you're using race as a determinant in anything, whether it's admission to college or anything else, that's racism. And then he could have gone ahead and won that argument. Back in a minute. Thank you. And some more Vivek Ramaswamy about a two-tiered justice system.
I think there are definitely two standards of justice in this country right now. Amen. And this is not specific to Biden and Trump alone. I mean, there's one standard for Julian Assange, who sits in a foreign prison, still in exile. I'm going to try to see him later this year. Another one for Chelsea Manning, who is the government agent who actually leaked information to him because she's transgender. So then now you see one standard for Hunter Biden, a different one for somebody who has a different last name, be it Trump or otherwise. Part of the problem is we have this bureaucracy. The IRS is one example of it. But a bureaucracy that really abandons the rule of law to decide what it feels like doing on a given day. And so those two stories between what Marjorie Taylor Greene's saying about Hunter Biden, about the testimony of the two IRS whistleblowers, these are deeply linked. They're both symptoms of a managerial class, a bureaucracy in this country that does whatever it sees fit and is going to effectively politically protect whichever party is actually protecting them and preserving them and their existence. And right now that's the Democrat Party, so they happen to be protecting them. If that changed in the future, they'd protect whoever paid for their continued existence. But that's exactly what's happening today.
Yeah.
I think there are...
And that was Vivek Ramaswamy talking about a two-tiered justice system. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now CNN about the Hunter Biden deal.
Breaking news, Wilmington, Delaware, from the Hunter Biden plea deal hearing. Our Kara Scannell just ran out from inside the courtroom. Kara, bring us up to speed.
Yeah, John, so as I went back into the courtroom, the hearing had just begun again. The judge was back on the bench, and she was pressing the prosecution on this investigation and the four corners of this plea agreement. One of the prosecutors said that the investigation was very much ongoing, and that she asked him, well, what is not covered in this plea agreement if you are leaving the possibility for there being other future charges? So then the judge said, would this include a possible FARA charge that's not registering as a foreign agent? The prosecutor said no, the deal would not include that. It was at that point that she had said to the prosecution, if you can charge that, then what does this mean? And the prosecutors, she asked Hunter Biden's attorneys about that, and he said, well, then there's no deal. And the prosecutor said, then there is no deal. So Biden's team said that the plea agreement, as far as they understood it, was now null and void. They were moving ahead to talk about what the next steps would be in this case. So as of right now, the deal appears to be dead and off the table, and it remains to be seen how they're going to move forward. But he has been charged with those two misdemeanor tax evasion charges. But one thing we learned is that this investigation is very much still ongoing.
Breaking news.
So that was the CNN talking about the Hunter Biden deal, which is, as we all know, is dead. So I don't care. I really don't care that much about Hunter Biden. I'm only playing this because it's breaking news, but I don't care that much about his problems in terms of taxes and whatnot, and gun charges and things of that nature. I couldn't care less. He gets a sweetheart deal, so what? The thing that really interests me about Hunter Biden is his connection to his father in terms of influence peddling. That's the big story. That's what I really want to know about, and that's what I want to really see some action on in Congress. Back in a minute. Thank you. And now SEAL Team 6.
I looked over at my swim partner, Rodney. He seemed to be thinking what I was. Damn, we got to do this for one more day. Okay, you've been screwing us for this long. Stick us in the ass for one more day. Somebody else, I don't remember who, wasn't going to do an extra day. He would rather quit. Fortunately, he didn't have to. Turn around and look at me when I'm talking to you, Instructor Stoneclam said. Like a platoon of zombies, we turned about face. There stood our commanding officer, Captain Larry Bailey. He had led one of the first SEAL Team 2 platoons in Vietnam. He also helped create SEAL Team Assault Boat, STAB. Congratulations, men. I am securing Hell Week. Some of the others jumped for joy. I was hurting too bad for that kind of celebration. Randy Clendenning cried tears of relief. He'd made it through with walking pneumonia. I stood there with a dumb look on my face. What am I doing here? I looked around. Where did everybody go? We'd started with 10 or 12 boat crews, 6 to 8 men in each. Now, we only had 4 or 5 boat crews. Why did those guys even start Hell Week if they knew they didn't want it? They didn't know they didn't want it. Medical personnel took Randy directly to the infirmary to ventilate him. They screened the rest of us. Some of the guys had cellulitis. Infection had traveled from cuts to deep inside the skin. Others had damaged the band of tissue over their pelvis, hip, and knee, causing iliotibial band syndrome. All of us were swollen. The physician reached down and squeezed my calves. As he pulled his hands away, I saw the indentation of his hands imprinted on my legs. They also examined us for flesh-eating bacteria. Actually, the bacteria release toxins that destroy skin and muscle rather than eating them. Since trauma covered our bodies from head to toe, we were meals on wheels for the killer bacteria. I took a shower, then drank some Gatorade. In the barracks on the top rack of the bunk bed lay my brown t-shirt. A friend had given it to me as a post-Hell Week present. We bought our own underwear using our clothing allowance, but only guys who finished Hell Week were allowed to wear the brown t-shirts. Having it made me so happy. I lay down and went to sleep. People kept watch on us while we slept to make sure we didn't swallow our tongues, drown in our spit, or simply stop breathing due to fatigue. The next day, I rolled over on the top rack of my bunk bed and jumped off the way I always did, but my legs weren't working. My face hit the deck, giving me a bloody nose and lip. I tried to call Laura Collect to let her know I made it through Hell Week, but when the operator came on the phone, my voice wasn't working. It took a few hours for my voice to come back. The driver took us over to the chow hall in a van. People helped us get out of the vehicle. As we hobbled into the chow hall, all eyes seemed to be on us. We were the ones who had just made it through the week. It had been the coldest week in 23 years. Hail had actually rained down on us at one point. While eating, I looked over at the tables where the guys who had quit during Hell Week sat. They avoided eye contact. I had begged one of them not to ring out, but he abandoned Mike and me to carry that boat by ourselves. Could have at least waited to quit until after we got that boat back to the barracks. He walked over to my table. I'm sorry, man. I know I let you guys down, but I just couldn't do it anymore. I looked up at him. Get out of my face. Training resumed slowly, starting with a lot of stretching exercises. Then it picked up speed. Time limits tightened. Distances increased. More swims, runs, and obstacle course trials. Academic tests continued. Pre-Hell Week, we had focused on topics such as first aid and boat handling. Now, we focused on hydrographic reconnaissance. Enlisted men like me had to score 70% or higher. Although we had lost all our officers, officer standards were 80% or higher. A new evolution we had to pass was the 50-meter underwater swim. At the pool, Instructor Stoneclam said, "All of you have to swim 50 meters underwater. You'll do a somersault into the pool so no one gets a diving start, and swim 25 meters across. Touch the end, and swim 25 meters back. If you break the surface at any time, you fail. Don't forget to swim along the bottom. The increased pressure on your lungs will help you hold your breath longer so you can swim farther." I lined up with the second group of 4 students. We cheered the first group on. Go for the blackout, some of us said. It was a new way of thinking that would influence future activities, pushing the body to the edge of unconsciousness. When it was my turn, I hyperventilated to decrease the carbon dioxide in my body and decrease the drive to breathe. During my somersault into the pool, I lost some breath. I oriented myself and swam as low as I could. After swimming 25 meters, I neared the other side. During my turn, my foot touched the wall, but I didn't get a great push off. My throat began to convulse as my lungs craved oxygen. Go for the blackout. I swam as hard as I could, but my body slowed down. The edges of my vision began to gray until I found myself looking at my destination through a black tunnel. As I felt myself begin to pass out, I actually felt peaceful. If I'd had any lingering thoughts about drowning, they were gone now. I tried to focus on the wall. Finally, my hand touched it. Instructor Stoneclam grabbed me by the waistband of my swim shorts and helped pull me out. I passed. Others were not so lucky. 2 failed their second chance and were expelled from training. Note, do not practice underwater swimming or breath holding at home because it will kill you. Another important post-Hell Week evolution was underwater knot tying. Wearing only our UDT shorts, my class climbed the outside stairs to the top of the dive tower and entered. Inside, I lowered myself into the warm water. The depth was 50 feet. I would have to dive down 15 feet and tie 5 knots, Beckett bend, sheet bend, bowline, clove hitch, right angle, rolling hitch 1, and square knot. These included some of the knots we would have to use for demolitions. For example, the Beckett bend and square knot can be used for splicing the end of a detonating det cord. We had practiced these knots during the few breaks we had, so I experienced no problem tying them. But this was the first time doing the knots at 15 feet underwater. We could tie 1 knot for each of 5 dives, but I thought that 5 dives would be too tiring. Or 1 dive with 5 knots. I didn't think I had the lungs for that. Or any combination we wanted. I greeted Instructor Stoneclam, who wore scuba gear. Respectfully request to tie the Beckett bend, bowline, and clove hitch. He gave me the thumbs down, giving me permission to descend. I mirrored his thumbs down, showing him that I understood. Stoneclam gave me the sign again, and I did my combat descent 15 feet below, where I had to tie into a trunk line secured to the walls. I tied the 3 knots. Then I gave the instructor the OK sign. He checked the knots and gave me the OK sign. I untied them and gave him the thumbs up. He acknowledged, pointing his thumb up, giving me permission to ascend. On my second dive, I tied the last 2 knots and gave Instructor Stoneclam the OK sign. He didn't even seem to look at the knots, staring into my eyes. I saw he was going to give me trouble. I gave him the thumbs up sign to ascend, but he just kept staring. The depth put pressure on my chest and my body craved air. I knew what he was looking for, and I wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The SEAL instructors had taught me well. I can ascend myself, or you can drag my body to the surface when I pass out. Either way. He smiled and gave me the up signal before I even came close to passing out. I wanted to shoot to the top, but I couldn't show panic, and shooting to the top isn't tactical. I ascended as slowly as I could. Pass. Not all of my classmates were as lucky, but they would get a second chance. In second phase, land warfare, we learned covert infiltrations, sentry removal, handling agents, guides, gathering intelligence, snatching the enemy, performing searches, handling prisoners, shooting, blowing stuff up, etc. As a child, I learned attention to detail, making sure that not one single pecan remained on the ground when my dad came home, saved my butt from getting whipped. Now, that same attention to detail would save my butt from getting shot or blown up. Attention to detail is why I would never have a parachute malfunction. We became the first occupants of the new barracks building, just down the beach from the multi-million-dollar Coronado condos. One Saturday afternoon, I sat in my room shining jungle combat boots with Callisto, one of the 2 Peruvian officers going through buds with our class. They had our training schedule, complete with days and times. Both of them had been through Peru's buds, which was a mirror image of our training. Callisto and his buddy had been operating for nearly 10 years as SEALs, including real-world ops. We received a lot of intelligence about training from them. I asked him, If you're already a Peruvian SEAL, why are you doing this again? Must come here before become Peru SEAL instructor. I understand you'll get more respect and all. Not respect. More money. His family had come with him, and he stayed with them on weekends in an apartment downtown. They bought a lot of blue jeans and sent them home. He explained that the amount of money they would receive would change their lives. They were the only officers remaining in our class, but because they weren't American, they couldn't lead us. Mike H. and E5 led our class. He and I shared the same rank, but he was senior to me. We didn't have any cake eaters, commissioned officers. The enlisted instructors seemed to enjoy it. Out at San Clemente Island, I served as a squad leader and once led my squad to assault the wrong target. Callisto led us the next time. He was an excellent land navigator. We assaulted the instructors while they were still sitting around the campfire, jacking their jaws. Our squad hit them so fast that they didn't even have their M60s set up yet. They were not happy. The instructors changed our exfil route and made us go out through a field of cacti. Later, the corpsmen had to come around with pliers to pull the needles out of our legs. During the debrief, the instructors explained, "Sorry we had to send you out another way, but the exfiltration route was compromised." The instructors always had the last laugh. We ran before each meal on even days. On odd days, we did pull-ups before each meal. One day, the number of pull-ups had just changed from 19 to 20. I must have had a brain fart because I dropped off the bar after 19 pull-ups. "Wasdin, what the hell are you doing?" an instructor asked. "That was only 19. I didn't understand what he was asking me. "The pull-up count is 20. Just to make sure you know how to count to 20, drop down and give me 20. I did 20 push-ups. "Now get back up on the bar and give me my 20 pull-ups. That wasn't happening. He got maybe 3 or 4 more out of me before my arms gave out. "Get your MRE and hit the surf." I got to sit down in the chilly ocean and eat a cold meal ready to eat, MRE. Randy Clendenning and some others joined me. We were shivering our petunias off. Randy had a smile on his face. "What the hell are you smiling about?" I asked. "We're up to our nipples in freezing water eating cold MREs. "Try doing this every other day." Randy always made the timed sprints but failed the pull-ups. Every other day, he sat in the ocean with water up to his chest and ate his cold MRE for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. He wanted the program way more than I did. After that, I risked trouble with the instructors to sneak food into the barracks for him on odd days. Other guys snuck him food too. I have the greatest respect for guys like Randy, who work harder than everyone else and somehow manage to finish buds. More than the gazelles running ahead, more than the fish swimming in front, more than the monkeys swinging through the O course. These underdogs were hardcore. One of the most famous of these underdogs was Thomas Norris, Bud's class 45. Norris wanted to join the FBI but got drafted instead. He joined the Navy to become a pilot, but his eyesight disqualified him, so he volunteered for SEAL training, where he often fell to the rear on runs and swims. The instructors talked about dropping him from the program. Norris didn't give up and became a SEAL at Team 2. In Vietnam in April 1972, a surveillance aircraft went down deep in enemy territory where over 30,000 NVA, North Vietnamese Army, were preparing for an Easter offensive. Only one crew member survived. This precipitated the most expensive rescue attempt of the Vietnam War, with 14 people killed, 8 aircraft downed, 2 rescuers captured, and 2 more rescuers stranded in enemy territory. It was decided that an air rescue was impossible. Lieutenant Norris led a 5-man Vietnamese SEAL patrol and located one of the surveillance aircraft pilots, then returned him to the Forward Operating Base, FOB. The NVA retaliated with a rocket attack on the FOB, killing 2 of the Vietnamese SEALs and others. Norris and his 3 remaining Vietnamese SEALs failed in an attempt to rescue the second pilot. Because of the impossibility of the situation, 2 of the Vietnamese SEALs wouldn't volunteer for another rescue attempt. Norris decided to take Vietnamese SEAL Nguyen Van Kiet to make another attempt, and failed. On April 12th, about 10 days after the plane had been shot down, Norris got a report of the pilot's location. He and Kiet disguised themselves as fishermen and paddled their sampan upriver into the foggy night. They located the pilot at dawn on the riverbank hidden under vegetation, helped him into their sampan, and covered him with bamboo and banana leaves. A group of enemy soldiers on land spotted them but couldn't get through the thick jungle as fast as Norris and his partner could paddle on the water. When the trio arrived near the FOB, an NVA patrol noticed and poured heavy machine gun fire down on them. Norris called in an airstrike to keep the enemy's heads down and a smoke screen to blind them. Norris and Kiet took the pilot into the FOB, where Norris gave him first aid until he could be evacuated. Lieutenant Thomas Norris received the Medal of Honor. Kiet received the Navy Cross, the highest award the Navy can give to a foreign national.
And that was part 3 of Chapter 5, The Only Easy Day Was Yesterday, from SEAL Team 6 by Howard-Wasdin. Back in a minute. Thank you. I'm Ron, your host and the only true conservative in the United States today, bidding adios to all of the butchers, bakers, and candlestick makers out there. And until next time, be honest, be smart, be beautiful, and remember that the left has no authority, no power, and they can't win.